to be with you. I'm Katie Tur. Welcome to the F around and find out presidency. No, seriously, that is how Donald Trump is billing it, posting this AI-generated image of himself as a gangster in a fedora with FAFO on the sign next to him. F around and find out. So what does that mean? For those of you who are not terminally online, it essentially means President Trump is telling the world and lawmakers here at home, try me. Colombia got it over the weekend when the president announced a 25% tariff and visa restrictions on Bogota when leaders there refused a U.S. military plane full of deported immigrants. Colombian President Gustavo Petro quickly backed down, notching a win for Donald Trump. So is that how this is going to go? Trump makes a decree, an official or a country scoffs, Trump levies a giant tariff or a travel ban, and then they just back down? Will that work with China? What about Mexico or Canada? And if it doesn't, what happens then? How much actual economic pain could come from these policies? And is President Trump willing to inflict it? Joining us now, NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans, chief White House correspondent for The New York Times, and MSNBC political analyst Peter Baker, and the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, Michael Froman. He served as the U.S. trade representative in the Obama administration. Christine, I'm going to start with you on this. It was a quick back and forth between Colombia and President Trump over the weekend, and you know, it worked in Donald Trump's favor. Is this what we should expect for Mexico and Canada going forward? The Wall Street Journal is reporting that he's already talking about a 25% tariff on those two countries.
Yeah, he has called himself tariff man. He is not all bark. He is all bite, and he will impose tariffs on these countries. And a lot of people think it's going to happen, at least for Canada and Mexico, come Saturday, that this is going to happen quickly. He doesn't even have his trade team in place yet. I mean, you know, confirmed, the Commerce Secretary and his U.S. trade representative. And so he is adamant that this is the tool he has. He is going to use it. He's been saying it for a year. I think there's no reason to think that he won't do it. You know, the discussion has been, will it be, is this only, you know, as a tool to get people to the negotiating table? And all the signs right now point to there's no negotiating table. There'll be tariffs, and then we'll see what happens after that.
Okay, so if these tariffs were levied, if Colombia, say, didn't back down and there was a 25 scaling up to 50% tariff on Colombia, their big imports or exports for us are coffee and bananas. What would that look like at the grocery store?
It would be higher coffee and higher banana prices and higher rose prices. They also export an awful lot of flowers. Let me give you an example. Washing machines. In the first Trump administration, President Trump put import tariffs on washing machines. The University of Chicago and the Fed found those tariffs raised prices on all washing machines by $92 each and brought in only $82 million in tariff money while increasing costs for the companies by a lot. So he's done this before. The question is, if he does it again, does that cause those companies like Samsung and LG to move their factories to the United States? That's what he wants.
Christine mentioned a negotiating table. You know, he's going to go to the extreme end of the bargain in order to get a better deal. And that's kind of been the modus operandi that we've experienced with Donald Trump over the years, certainly during the first administration. Peter, though, Christine was saying there's no negotiating table this time. It's this or else. You know, F around and find out. I'm going to be very careful when I say that so I don't say the whole phrase because it will get me fired. But do you sense a different Donald Trump this time, a different Donald Trump administration, a bigger willingness to actually do the extreme things that he's saying he'll do?
Well, I think you see a president who is more willing to use the instruments of American power than his modern day presidents predecessors have been. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One is it has been effective. We have seen even just in the last week, even before he became inaugurated, he used threats in order to achieve policy goals. The lesson he has taken from, you know, threatening all hell will break out in the Middle East is it worked in terms of motivating the parties there to have a ceasefire in Gaza. The lesson he takes from threatening sanctions or threatening tariffs, on Canada is that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will rush to Mar-a-Lago and pledge to do whatever Donald Trump wants, in effect. I mean, he's not saying that, but he is definitely deferring to Trump's needs and desires in a way that other prime ministers might not have done with other presidents. So from his point of view, it's working. Now, that doesn't mean there's not long-term consequences. Not much of a negotiation. It's not really very subtle. And you're using it against people in countries that are typically our friends that we may need in other circumstances. At the same time, he's bashing the European Union. The European Union may be really important to us if we end up in a trade war with China. So it has costs if you use this kind of technique in a more expansive way.
Peter,
but for the moment, Trump is trying to tell the world, do what I say, and everything will be fine.
Yeah, elaborate on that. Elaborate on the ways in which we might need are typically our friends here. Why would we need Colombia for another in another situation? You mentioned the EU needing them in a trade war if that happens against China. What else should we be concerned about?
Well, all kinds of things. We use our friends for intelligence sharing. They help us suss out threats to us around the world. We use our friends often for military operations if we feel that we need to in certain sectors of the world. We use them for diplomacy when we need to put pressure on mutual adversaries to do important things. Colombia has been one of our better friends, and it's partly because of the friendship we've had with Colombia that we have minimized some of the drug toll that we saw in decades past because we collaborated with them in going after the cartels. So there are benefits to friendships, not just transactional relationships in which we threaten to use economic force if they don't give us what we want.
But at the same time, Donald Trump is saying that the people that he's sending back are criminals. They're people that don't need to be in this country, shouldn't be in this country. So is there a cost if we are forcing countries to take back people who came here without the proper documentation, then committed crimes here? Peter.
Well, in the case of Colombia, it was a dispute over what kind of airplanes we were using to send them back. It wasn't even over sending back the migrants. They've taken back hundreds of planes of migrants long before Trump came in office. But what they objected to was using the U.S. military planes to do so. And rather than simply, having a quick conversation and figuring out a way around it, Trump quickly went up the escalatory ladder and made it out to be an all-out kind of confrontation. Now, that may be what he wants, and may be the signal he's trying to send to other countries that he's willing to escalate where previous presidents might not have, or even small disputes. And therefore, I think it creates an atmosphere in which other countries, he hopes, will preemptively defer and preemptively, cater to what they believe to be his wishes, even without him having to ask.
And there is intention behind sending a military flight rather than a commercial flight. What message that sends? Mike, I want to get to you with the big question, which is, does this sort of thing work with China?
Well, first of all, I think it just shows how attractive the U.S. market is as an incentive for other countries to work with us, and how the threat of closing our market to their exports has a great deal of leverage. As Peter says, it works. It got people's attention. In this case, it was relatively easy because it was a very specific issue, taking these military planes, and so it could be resolved quite quickly. I think the problem or the question around China and maybe some of the other countries is it's a much more complex relationship. And so what is it we're asking these other countries to do? How will we know that they've done them? How long will it take? And there, if you actually go and impose the tariffs, it has a whole series of costs. The direct cost of imposing the tariffs, the cost of retaliation, the cost of other countries imitating our behavior, and then very importantly, longer term, it really opens the door to China. Because for years, we've been critical of China for using its economic power as a coercive tool. We see them do this. We've seen them do this against Japan, against Korea, against Australia. And frankly, China doing that helped those countries develop closer relationships with us. The same thing can happen in reverse. If the U.S. is now seen as engaging in the same type of economic coercion that China has, we could be opening the door for more Chinese influence, where those in Colombia or elsewhere would argue, what's the difference between the U.S. and China? They're both using their economic power against us.
Are our markets more attractive, though, than China? Is there a situation where Donald Trump does have better leverage in making these, forcing Colombia or other countries to to do what he wants them to do. In this case, it's taking back people who are here without papers, sending back, immigrants. In other cases, it could be wanting a better trade deal, or it could be wanting a country to pay more into NATO. There's other situations. Are our markets so attractive that Donald Trump does actually find himself in the catbird position?
Well, I think we do have a fair amount of leverage, and particularly over some countries more than others. Mexico, Canada, very much dependent on the U.S. economy. But most of the world is highly dependent on China. China is their number one trading partner, and so we just have to keep that in mind. I think the question will be: take Mexico for example. Tariffs are expected to go into place as early as February 1st, 25% tariffs. He's talked about dealing with migration issues and fentanyl. That's not something that can be decided or resolved over a weekend, like the Colombia military plane issue was resolved. And so will the tariffs go into place? How long will they last? How will we know what the negotiation looks like and when it's reached successful implementation? And what's the damage done in the meantime? It's weighing those trade-offs that I think is very much at issue. And oftentimes we seem to take economic policy steps like threatening or imposing tariffs without sufficient concern about what the short, medium, and long-term costs of trade-offs are going to be.